For 6 days, my wife believed I was unconscious, so she felt safe saying the one thing she had never dared say while I could answer. Standing beside my hospital bed, Laura told the doctor that 57 years was a respectable amount of life, and that I would never want the family burdened by a long recovery. My biological son asked how quickly the lake house could be sold after the estate opened. My daughter complained that she had already missed 2 client meetings visiting a father who had missed most of her childhood performances. The stepson I had raised since kindergarten said he could take control of my company before employees began asking difficult questions. Then they discussed whether Thanksgiving would be the right time to announce that the family was moving forward. I could hear every word. I could not open my eyes, move my fingers, or tell them the machines were wrong. The moment I finally woke, my wife cried, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "You came back to us." I held her hand and pretended I had heard nothing. 5 weeks later, she invited 30 relatives to Thanksgiving dinner and handed me a transition plan that sold my home, removed me from the company I had built, and placed every remaining account under her oldest son's control. She expected a tired man with a damaged memory to sign wherever she pointed. Instead, I placed 30 months of hidden transfers beside the turkey, looked at each person who had planned a life after me, and said, "Before we discuss where I'm going, I want everyone to repeat what they said when they thought I was already gone." My name is Thomas Calder, though almost everyone calls me Tom. I was 57 years old when this happened, living in a Tudor-style house in Webster Groves, Missouri, just outside St. Louis. Laura and I had owned that house for 26 years. It had leaded glass windows, narrow hardwood stairs, a screened porch, and a dining room large enough for the Thanksgiving gatherings. Laura considered proof that our family was close. We had raised 3 children there. Technically, I had raised 2 children and 1 stepson, although I had never used that word unless paperwork forced me to. Evan Pierce was 5 years old when I met Laura. His biological father had disappeared into a series of construction jobs, girlfriends, and promises that rarely lasted beyond a weekend. Laura was 24, working reception at an orthodontic office, and living in a basement apartment with a little boy who slept beside her because the furnace rattled at night. I met her when the office hired my new company to repair a failing refrigeration unit used for dental materials. I owned 1 van, 2 toolboxes, and enough confidence to disguise how terrified I was of missing payroll for the single employee who worked beside me. Laura asked direct questions, laughed without checking whether anyone important was listening, and loved Evan with the fierce alertness of someone who had spent years expecting help to disappear. I fell in love with both of them. Evan began calling me Tom, then Tommy, then Dad, after I taught him to ride a bicycle in the church parking lot. Nobody told him to. One afternoon he fell, scraped both knees, and screamed, "Dad!" before he realized which man he had called. I carried him to the car while Laura cried behind us. We married the following spring. I did not formally adopt Evan because his biological father refused to surrender the last legal connection he rarely used. At the time, I told myself paperwork did not define fatherhood. For nearly 30 years, I believed my behavior had proven that. I attended Evan's baseball games, school conferences, wisdom teeth surgery, college orientation, and first disastrous attempt at living with roommates. I paid tuition when his biological father sent birthday cards without checks. I loaned him money after graduation, hired him into my business, promoted him, trusted him with vendor relationships, and introduced him as my oldest son. Laura and I later had Dylan and Sophie. Dylan was 27 when the accident happened. Sophie was 24. They grew up believing Evan had always belonged, yet they also learned that belonging in our family was measured partly by proximity to the business I built. Calder Institutional Systems started in a rented bay behind a tire shop in 1998. We installed, repaired, and maintained commercial refrigeration, food service equipment, and kitchen systems for schools, hospitals, nursing facilities, hotels, and restaurant groups across Missouri and southern Illinois. It was not glamorous work. Nobody photographs the technician who repairs a walk-in freezer at 3 in the morning before a hospital cafeteria loses $40,000 of food. But emergencies create loyal clients. By 2025, we had 56 employees, a warehouse in Maryland Heights, a service fleet, long-term contracts with several school districts, and annual revenue large enough that Laura began describing me as a businessman rather than a repairman. I was proud of the company, but I also used it as an excuse more often than I understood at the time. Sophie was correct about one thing she said beside my hospital bed. I missed parts of her childhood. I missed the opening night of a middle school play because a hotel kitchen lost refrigeration before a convention. I arrived late to a piano recital with grease on my cuff. I took calls during birthday dinners. I left vacations early when large clients panicked. I always believed I was building security for the family. Sometimes I was. Sometimes I was hiding inside work because machines were easier than disappointed people. A broken compressor did not remember previous arguments. A failing control panel could be diagnosed. Children required presence without measurable completion, and I often promised myself I would become more available after the next contract, the next expansion, or the next difficult year. There was always another difficult year. Laura covered what I missed and kept a quiet ledger of resentment. She never presented the entire account at once. She made small withdrawals. Sophie stopped expecting you. Dylan learned not to ask. Evan became the man of the house while you were at the warehouse. Some of that was true. Some was designed to keep me guilty enough to fund any request that followed. Guilt became the family currency I never audited. If Dylan needed a better car, Laura reminded me how many baseball games I had missed. If Sophie wanted help with an expensive apartment after college, Laura said I had spent enough time prioritizing the business. If Evan made a reckless decision at work, Laura asked whether I was threatened by seeing another man lead. Every boundary became a referendum on whether I had loved the family enough. I kept paying. I kept promoting. I kept apologizing through access. Evan joined Calder Systems at 23 after leaving a property management job he hated. He began in scheduling, moved into purchasing, and eventually became vice president of operations. He was intelligent and calm under pressure. He remembered client names, anticipated delivery problems, and spoke in the measured tone that made chaotic people feel a plan already existed. Employees trusted him at first. I trusted him almost completely. The few people who challenged him did not last. Evan described them as resistant to modernization, negative about leadership, or unwilling to understand family business culture. I signed their termination documents without speaking to some of them directly. That was another failure waiting to become relevant. Dylan entered the business after college with the title Director of Business Development. The title was more real than the work. He attended trade dinners, forwarded client leads, played golf with restaurant owners, and posted photographs from job sites wearing clean boots. I kept believing responsibility would eventually grow behind the title. Dylan kept believing the title proved it already had. Sophie chose a different path. She opened a boutique event design studio called Finch and Bloom, creating floral installations, corporate launch events, engagement parties, and high-end private dinners. She was talented. She was also financially undisciplined and deeply sensitive to any suggestion that talent did not excuse late invoices. I guaranteed her first commercial lease, covered payroll twice, paid for a delivery van, and referred corporate clients. She rarely thanked me publicly because she had built her brand around being self-made. Privately, she called when the bank account tightened. I answered because every transfer felt like repayment for one more missed performance. Laura worked only occasionally after the children became teenagers. She managed charitable committees, hosted client dinners, and became the public face of our family's success. Our house appeared constantly on social media: Thanksgiving tables, Christmas garlands, company anniversaries, photographs of Laura and me beneath captions about partnership. She was skilled at making a complicated family appear warm, balanced, and grateful. I mistook the quality of the photographs for evidence the relationships were healthy. The accident happened on a wet Tuesday evening in September. I had stayed late at the Maryland Heights warehouse after a school district project arrived with the wrong electrical specifications. Evan left around 7, saying he had dinner plans. Dylan had gone golfing with a potential client and never returned. I remained until nearly 10, reviewing replacement equipment with our longtime controller, Marian Lopez. Marian had been with me for 18 years. She knew every account, every employee's anniversary, and every excuse owners use when they do not want to confront bad news. "Go home," she said. "Laura already thinks I live here. Laura knows you don't." The statement felt strange, but I was too tired to ask what she meant. Rain had begun falling hard by the time I reached Interstate 64. Near the Clayton interchange, a delivery truck changed lanes too quickly, clipped the front of my SUV, and sent me across wet pavement into the concrete barrier. I remember the sound more than the impact. Metal folding, glass breaking, a horn that continued after everything else stopped. then darkness. Doctors later described a head injury, fractured ribs, a collapsed lung, and swelling that made neurological responses difficult to interpret. What I experienced was not sleep. I heard pieces, machines, wheels in the hallway, nurses introducing themselves, a television playing somewhere, Laura crying during the first night, someone washing my face, a doctor asking me to squeeze his hand while every part of my mind screamed at fingers that did not respond. Time had no shape. I learned days through conversations. On what I believe was the third morning, a physician explained that my brain activity was encouraging but uncertain. He may wake soon, the doctor said. He may remain unresponsive for another week. We need to monitor swelling and respiratory function, Laura asked. And if his heart stops, we would follow the resuscitation instructions currently on file. What instructions? Full intervention. Silence. Then Laura said, Tom would hate that, I wanted to answer. He always said he never wanted machines keeping him alive. I had never said that. I had told her once that if I were dying from an irreversible illness with no awareness or hope of recovery, I did not want months of invasive treatment. That conversation happened after a neighbor's long cancer battle. I had not told her to stop saving me after 3 days in a hospital at 57. He's lived more than most people, she continued. He built the company, raised the children. 57 is a respectable amount of life. Respectable. As if my remaining years were excess inventory, the doctor asked whether she wanted time to discuss it with the family. They agree, Laura replied. Someone else shifted near the bed. Evan's voice entered. Dad never wanted to become a burden. The word burden hurt almost as much as the age. We should respect the man he was, Evan said. The man he was. Past tense while I listened. A pen clicked. Papers moved. The doctor said they were documenting preferences, not immediately withdrawing treatment. Laura said she understood. I lay inside my body and learned that the wife who had posted photographs about forever needed less than a week to convert me into memory. That evening, all 4 of them came. Laura sat closest. Evan stood near the window. Dylan opened a soda. Sophie's bracelet struck the rail when she moved a chair. They spoke quietly at first, then the comfort of my silence made them careless. Sophie said, How long are we expected to keep coming every day? Laura answered sharply, He's your father. I know. But I have the hotel launch Friday, and I already moved 2 client meetings. Dylan said, Nobody's asking you to sit here all day. You haven't either. I was here yesterday, for 40 minutes. At least I'm not making it about childhood. Sophie became quiet. Then she said, He missed almost every important thing I did. I'm allowed to have feelings now that everyone wants us to pretend he was always present. The words hurt because they contained truth. I had no defense available except the one I had used for years. I was working for you. Lying helplessly beside her, I finally heard how inadequate that answer sounded. Dylan said, Whatever happened when we were kids, the trust is still supposed to split equally. Laura hissed his name. What? Evan already knows. I found the estate folder in Dad's study last year. Once everything clears, there's the company shares, the lake house, the investment account. Not beside him, Laura said. He can't hear us, Dylan replied. And if he wakes up? Sophie asked. Silence, Evan answered. Then we help him recover. His voice was calm, reliable. If he doesn't, we need a clean transition at Calder Systems before employees start choosing sides. Vendors will panic if leadership looks uncertain. I know every account and contract. I can keep the company stable. What about Marion? Dylan asked. Marion handles numbers. She doesn't lead. You'd become president? Someone has to. Laura said. Your father always wanted Evan protected. Dylan laughed quietly. Protected? He's already vice president. He isn't legally Tom's son. The sentence hung in the room. Evan replied, That's why we shouldn't assume anything. The will includes you, Dylan said. I saw it. Wills can change. Dad's unconscious. Exactly. I heard the fear beneath Evan's efficiency, and for one dangerous moment I felt compassion. I had spent years telling him blood did not matter, but some part of him had never believed me. Then he said, The sooner the estate and company transition are settled, the less room there is for conflict. I was not dead. They were already discussing which disagreements my death would simplify. During the next 3 days, I heard more. Dylan took a call near my bed and asked a realtor about lakefront listings near Table Rock, saying he would have liquidity soon. Sophie told Laura that the Webster Groves house was too large for one person and would photograph beautifully after updating the kitchen. Laura said she had already spoken to Andrew about likely value. Andrew Sloan was a realtor we had known socially for years. He sponsored charity events Laura organized and appeared too often in photographs I had never examined closely. Evan answered business calls from my room, telling employees I was stable but unlikely to return quickly, and instructing them to route major decisions through him. He told one vendor, "Tom's era may be ending sooner than expected." My era. I opened my eyes on the sixth day. A nurse noticed first. Her name was Camille. She leaned over, asked me to blink twice, then shouted for another nurse with a joy so genuine that I nearly cried before my eyes could focus. Doctors tested speech, memory, movement, and orientation. My voice sounded scraped raw. My left hand remained weak, but I answered every question. When Laura entered, she froze inside the doorway. Relief appeared. "I want to be fair about that." She cried and rushed toward me. Beneath the relief, something else flashed: fear, disappointment, calculation, perhaps all three. She kissed my forehead. "You came back." I looked at the woman who had called 57 a respectable amount of life. Apparently, I was terrified. "I know. We all were. I know." Evan arrived 20 minutes later. He took my hand with both of his. "Dad." The word nearly broke me. "You scared us." "Sorry." "Don't apologize, just rest. I've got the company." "I'm lucky to have you." He lowered his head modestly. The performance worked because part of it remained true. He had managed the company. He had also been planning to inherit it. Dylan arrived carrying flowers still wrapped in store plastic. Sophie posted a photograph of my hand beneath hers with the caption, "Miracles happen when families refuse to give up." Laura shared it. Hundreds of people praised their devotion. I read the comments from my hospital bed and wondered how many family stories become accepted because the person harmed is too exhausted to correct the photograph. I returned home 4 days later. Everyone behaved beautifully. Laura arranged pillows, prepared soup, monitored medication, and insisted I sleep downstairs. Evan visited daily, carried paperwork, and told me no decision required my attention. Dylan stocked the refrigerator for the first time in his life. Sophie brought a candle whose scent made my injured head pound but smiled so hopefully that I thanked her. I played the role they needed. Weak, grateful, foggy, occasionally confused. I asked the same question twice, even when I remembered the answer. I paused before names. I said bright light hurt. Most of those things were partly true. I emphasized them because I needed time. Pretending weakness is dangerous when people already want to believe it. It is also informative. Laura began speaking more freely on the phone. Evan stopped closing folders completely. Dylan asked whether I remembered discussing changes to his compensation before the accident. Sophie told me I had once promised to invest in a second studio, a promise I had never made. They tested the edges of my memory, the way people test a locked door, after hearing the owner may have misplaced the key. The first person I called privately was Marion. I told Laura I had a follow-up appointment and asked Ben, no Ben in this family. I had no son-in-law yet. I asked my former service manager, Raymond Ellis, to drive me. Ray had retired the year before after 22 years with Calder Systems. He was 64, widowed, and too blunt to be invited often to family parties. He picked me up, listened without interrupting, and drove me to Marion's small office at the warehouse through a side entrance. Marion closed the blinds. "I thought you would call sooner," she said. "You knew?" I knew something was wrong. I did not know how much. "Show me." She hesitated. "Tom, once you see it, you can't go back to believing this is ordinary family dysfunction." I heard them plan my funeral 6 feet from my body. She opened the records. Over 30 months, Evan had directed payments to 3 vendors that looked legitimate at a glance. Midwest Procurement Partners, Gateway Installation Consulting, Pierce Logistics Management. 2 existed only through mailing addresses and accounts controlled by him. The third belonged to a former friend who forwarded most payments back after keeping a percentage. Inflated invoices, duplicate equipment charges, management fees, and consulting payments had moved $618,000 out of Calder Systems. Laura had approved 13 transfers above Evan's authorization limit. She signed these electronically. Could she have believed they were real? Marion looked at me. 3, maybe. 13, no. I stared at Laura's name beside amounts large enough to pay annual salaries. Why didn't you tell me? I tried. She opened old emails. 3 messages asking to review vendor irregularities. Evan had responded before I saw them, saying Marion was resistant to new procurement systems. Another email requested a private meeting. Dylan forwarded it to Evan with the comment, "Marion's doing her suspicious accountant thing again." I had canceled the meeting after Evan said a school district emergency required my attention. "You should have come to my house." I considered it. "Why didn't you?" "Because Evan told employees your home life was under strain, and Laura was worried about your blood pressure. He said unexpected conflict could cause a medical event." He had begun constructing my fragility before the accident. Where did the money go? Marion opened another summary. Evan used part to cover personal debt, part to make a down payment on a condo he claimed he was renting, and part to fund an investment with Andrew Sloan. Smaller payments flowed monthly to Finch and Bloom. Sophie's studio, $2,500, sometimes $3,000. Sophie knew, at minimum, she knew the money did not come from ordinary event work. How long? 14 months. My daughter had discovered the theft and converted silence into recurring revenue. Dylan received no direct transfers, but the company paid his vehicle lease, club membership, travel, fuel, phone, and expenses, exceeding his salary by nearly $90,000 over 2 years. Does Dylan know about Evan? I don't think so. He knows Calder Systems functions as his personal account. And Laura? Marion's expression changed. There's a separate issue. Payments to Andrew Sloan included fees for consulting on family real estate, although I had never authorized any sale. Andrew had produced valuations for our home, our cabin near Innsbruck, and the warehouse property. Messages attached to invoices discussed moving quickly once Tom's situation is resolved. Resolved. How close is Laura to Andrew? I asked. Marion looked away. That is not something accounting can answer. It did not need to. The family tablet in our kitchen answered 2 nights later. Laura left it charging while showering. A message appeared across the screen. Andrew, Thanksgiving plans still on? Once he signs control to Evan, the house decision gets easier. I'm tired of waiting for a life that keeps getting postponed. Laura replied from her phone. He's weaker than he admits. The accident may have finally made him realistic. Another message appeared. And us? After the holidays, I promised. 13 months of conversations were synced to the tablet. Hotel lunches. Meetings described to me as charity work. Photographs not explicit enough to require imagination. Laura telling Andrew she had spent decades married to a man who loved responsibility more than her. Andrew asking whether she could live with me another year if the company transition took time. Laura saying the crash had nearly solved everything, then adding, I hate myself for thinking that. I sat at the kitchen island while water ran upstairs and felt 30 years of marriage change shape. We had real years, good years, difficult years, vacations, funerals, sick children, laughter in grocery aisles, arguments over paint colors, nights when she held me through panic about payroll. The betrayal did not make those years imaginary. It made them insufficient protection against who she had chosen to become. I photographed the messages and returned the tablet before she came downstairs. Headache? She asked, seeing my face. A little. She touched my cheek. You're pushing too hard. Her tenderness felt worse than cruelty. Over the next 4 weeks, Marion and I separated fact from rage. We removed Evan's access to large transfers without alerting him, requiring additional approval he assumed was temporary fraud protection after my accident. We reviewed vendors, secured customer accounts, changed banking permissions, and promoted Marion to chief financial officer. Raymond returned temporarily to supervise operations. I called key clients personally, told them I was recovering, and assured them the company had stable leadership. I did not accuse my family publicly. I did not empty accounts, cancel payroll, or burn down the business to deny them access. I protected employees first. 56 families depended on decisions made inside Calder Systems. Revenge that harms innocent people is simply another form of entitlement. I removed Dylan's company purchasing authority and vehicle privileges effective after Thanksgiving. I ended transfers to Sophie's studio. I prepared an internal repayment plan documenting what she had received. Evan's employment would end after the family dinner with an opportunity to repay before the company pursued more serious action. I changed my estate plans, but the documents were not the emotional point. I left protected education funds for any future grandchildren, a modest personal amount for each biological child, and no company ownership for any family member. Evan would receive letters, photographs, my father's watch, and nothing that allowed him to interpret love as access to assets. The company would move gradually toward employee ownership, beginning with profit sharing for the managers, technicians, dispatchers, and warehouse staff who had actually built it beside me. I had spent years calling Calder Systems a family business, while employees sacrificed evenings and relatives collected titles. That ended. Laura planned Thanksgiving as though nothing had changed. She invited 30 relatives, including Andrew Sloan, whom she described as helping us make long-term housing decisions. That detail nearly made me laugh. She ordered a large turkey, 2 hams, floral centerpieces, and a professionally printed sign reading, "Grateful for second chances." She posted photographs of herself arranging the table beneath a caption about how nearly losing me had reminded her what mattered. I watched neighbors praise her strength. The night before Thanksgiving, Evan texted me, "Dad, tomorrow may feel overwhelming. Please don't embarrass the family by resisting every suggestion. The transition plan is designed to protect you. Sign it, rest, and let us handle what happens next." I replied, "Bring the complete plan." He sent a thumbs up. Thanksgiving morning, I dressed slowly. My ribs still hurt. The scar near my temple had faded from purple to red. Laura wore a rust-colored dress and asked whether I needed help with my tie. "I've got it." "You always say that." "Not anymore," she smiled. Misunderstanding. Guests arrived at noon. My sister Ellen, Laura's brother and his wife, cousins, neighbors, company-adjacent friends, Sophie's boyfriend, Dylan's college friends, Andrew, and several relatives who had heard I was struggling. They watched me carefully, measuring pauses and balance. Evan had prepared them. Aunt Marie took my hand and spoke too loudly, asking whether I remembered her. "You borrowed my truck in 2008 and returned it without gasoline." She laughed nervously. Still sharp. "Enough." Andrew shook my hand and held it longer than necessary. "Glad you're back, Tom. I hear you've been helping the family prepare." His eyes flickered toward Laura, just offering options. Generous. Dylan arrived in a sport coat purchased through the company account. Sophie wore earrings I recognized from an event invoice. Evan came last, carrying a leather portfolio. He kissed Laura's cheek and hugged me carefully. "Ready for a good day?" "Very." During the meal, everyone performed gratitude. Laura gave a toast about miracles. Dylan told a story about learning not to take fathers for granted. Sophie said the accident had brought clarity. Evan praised the employees who had kept Calder Systems running under his leadership. Andrew complimented the house and mentioned the market remains strong for properties with historic character. Every sentence pointed toward the presentation waiting after dessert. I listened. Ayate. I watched Laura's hand rest briefly against Andrew's arm while passing a serving dish. I noticed Sophie checking Evan before answering questions. I saw Dylan glance toward the study when someone mentioned the company. The family had become a collection of private expectations hidden beneath one polished table. After pie, Evan tapped his spoon against a glass. "Since Dad's accident, we've all had to face difficult realities." Conversation stopped. He opened the leather portfolio. "Dad has built an extraordinary life, but recovery changes what is safe and sustainable. We've created a family transition plan that protects him, Mom, the company, and the legacy." Printed folders moved around the table. My house appeared on the first page. So did the Calder Systems logo. Page 2 proposed that Evan become acting president with full operational and financial authority. Dylan would oversee business development. Sophie would manage company events and branding. Laura would receive control over family real estate decisions. I would become chairman emeritus, a title with no authority. Page 5 recommended selling the Webster Groves house and moving Laura and me into separate units within an upscale senior community until caregiving compatibility could be reassessed. Separate units. My marriage had already been divided on paper. Page 7 proposed selling the Innsbruck cabin and using part of the proceeds to stabilize family members affected by Tom's reduced earning capacity. Dylan had listed a housing allocation. Sophie had listed studio expansion. Evan had listed management compensation for preserving the company. Page 9 named Andrew as exclusive listing agent. Laura sat beside me with tears ready. "We love you," she said. "This is not about taking anything. What is it about? Removing pressure. From whom? Evan answered. Everyone. My sister Ellen frowned. Has Tom agreed to this? We've discussed pieces, Laura said. He becomes confused when too much information comes at once. I looked at her. Do I? Sometimes. Give an example. Tom, please don't turn this into a test. Evan adopted the patient voice he had used at the hospital. Dad, nobody questions your intelligence. We're acknowledging your health. My doctor cleared me to return gradually to work. He smiled sadly. That's not what you told me. What did I tell you? That you struggle to focus, that memory comes and goes, and that you're frightened. I had told him none of those things in that form. You mean when I asked the same question twice? Among other moments. I was testing whether your answer changed. His smile vanished. Laura whispered, Tom. Keep presenting, I said. Evan closed the folder slightly. There's no reason for hostility. I'm listening. Andrew leaned forward. The housing market may soften by spring. Acting now protects value. And your commission, he looked offended. Tom, I'm here as a friend. To which member of the family? Laura's hand froze near her glass. The room sensed something beyond the plan. Evan said, this is exactly why we wanted a calm conversation. Good. Let's have one. I reached beside my chair and lifted a plain cardboard file box onto the table. Marion had offered a polished binder. I chose the box because betrayal does not become cleaner when placed in leather. I removed 5 envelopes and set them in front of Laura, Evan, Dylan, Sophie, and Andrew. Before anyone signs my future away, we're going to discuss what happened while you believed I didn't have one. Nobody moved. Laura's face lost color. Evan stared at the envelopes. Dylan laughed nervously. What does that mean? I looked at him first. At Naples, no. We were in Street Lewis. At Barnes, Jewish Hospital, beside my bed, you said, once the estate clears, the trust starts paying out. I know what my share is. You called a realtor about lakefront property and said you would have liquidity soon. Dylan's mouth opened. Dad, you were unconscious. No, I was unable to move. Silence hit the table hard enough that I heard the refrigerator running in the kitchen. Sophie covered her mouth. Laura whispered, You heard us? Every one of you. Evan's posture changed from caring son to executive under threat. Brain injuries can distort memory. That would be comforting. I looked at Sophie. You said I was never there for your important moments, so you did not know why you should rearrange your life for me. Tears entered her eyes. I was angry. You were also partly right. That surprised her. I missed things. I treated providing as a substitute for presence. I'm sorry. She began crying harder. But my failures as a father did not make my death an acceptable business opportunity. They also did not authorize you to accept monthly payments for keeping quiet about what Evan was doing. Her face emptied. Laura turned toward her. What payments? Sophie looked at Evan. Tell her, I said. Finch and Bloom received $37,500 through vendors controlled by Evan. Sophie discovered irregular transfers and asked for a monthly consulting arrangement instead of telling me. That's not what happened, Sophie said quickly. Then explain. I saw invoices. Evan said the company was using alternate accounts for tax and vendor reasons. Did you provide services? Some. List them. Silence. You knew. I knew something wasn't right. And you priced your silence. She stood. I am not doing this in front of everyone. You accepted the money while allowing everyone to describe you as independent. Sit or leave, but the truth remains. Sophie sat. I turned toward Dylan. You did not participate in the hidden vendor accounts. Relief appeared too soon. You did, however, use private estate papers, discuss my death as liquidity, and charge nearly $90,000 in vehicles, travel, memberships, and personal expenses to a company where your actual work would not justify half your salary. You gave me the card? For business. I brought in clients. Name 3 active accounts you originated and maintained. He looked toward Evan. This is humiliating. You spoke about my death 3 feet from my body. His eyes filled. I thought you were gone. Exactly. I looked at Laura. She had not opened her envelope. Read it. Not here. You invited the audience. We invited family to protect you. Read it. Her hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside were printed transfers bearing her electronic approval, photographs of messages with Andrew, and a copy of the transition plan she had discussed before my accident. Her eyes moved quickly. Andrew stood. This is private marital material. Sit down. You have no right to involve me. You evaluated my house, cabin, and warehouse while sleeping with my wife. Gasps moved around the table. Laura whispered, Tom, please. How long? Aunt Ellen asked. Laura closed her eyes. It's not what he thinks, Andrew spoke. Laura and I became close during a difficult period. 13 months, I said. Hotel receipts on Tuesday afternoons. Messages during charity meetings. Plans to move after Thanksgiving. You wrote that the accident may have finally made me realistic. Laura began sobbing. I hated myself for saying that. Not enough to stop. You were never home. I was home enough to fund the life you were planning with him. This marriage had been lonely for years. Then leave honestly. I was afraid. Of what? Losing everything. The truth escaped. The room became quiet. You wanted the marriage gone without losing the house, company access, cabin, accounts, or public image. That is not all I wanted. What else? I wanted peace. You signed approval for Evan to remove $618,000 from Calder Systems. Laura turned toward him. You said those transfers protected his ownership position. He has no ownership position, I said. Evan's face tightened. Because you never adopted me. The sentence carried 30 years of pain sharpened into accusation. I raised you. You never made it legal. Your biological father refused. You could have fought harder. Maybe. Dylan and Sophie were always guaranteed everything. I had to build security. By stealing it? By protecting myself. From the man who paid your tuition, hired you, promoted you, loaned you money, included you equally in every estate plan and called you son? Plans can change, so you change them first. His voice rose. You do not understand what it feels like to belong because one man keeps choosing you. If that man changes his mind, you have nothing. I let the sentence sit. I understand fear. I do not accept theft as treatment for it. You always made me prove myself. I promoted you over people with more experience. Because Mom pushed. Laura looked at him. Evan, it's true. He never trusted me like Dylan. Dylan laughed bitterly. Dad barely trusts me to order lunch. He gave you his name. Evan struck the table with his palm. You all got his name. I gave you my life, I said. My voice remained level. You decided the name mattered more. He stared at me. Did you ever really think of me as your son? Every day until I heard you call my survival a transition problem. His face broke for a second. That's not an answer. Yes, I loved you as my son. That love was real. It does not make you safe to keep near my company or finances. He looked down. I turned the first summary toward the relatives. 30 months, $618,000. 3 false vendors, 13 large transfers approved by Laura. Monthly payments to Sophie. Personal expenses for Dylan. Real estate planning with Andrew. While I was in the hospital, they believed my death would make the arrangement permanent. Andrew reached for his coat. I'm leaving. Good. You'll hear from me. About what? The house you don't own? Or the commission you won't receive? He left through the kitchen. Laura watched him go. He did not look back at her. That small fact seemed to hurt more than the exposure. Evan said, What have you done? Protected the company. Meaning? Your financial authority ended 3 weeks ago. Marion Lopez is Chief Financial Officer. Raymond Ellis is Acting Operations Director. Every vendor is verified. Every major account is secure. Clients have been informed that I am returning gradually. You removed me? Your employment ends today. You cannot run the company without me. The company has been running without access to your schemes for 3 weeks. Employees will leave. Not one has. You planned this ambush. You planned my removal while I was learning to breathe again. Laura wiped her face. And me? Our marriage is over. Several relatives shifted. Tom, she whispered. Not tonight. You chose tonight when you placed separate senior apartments in a family care plan. That was Evan's language. You approved it. I was trying to create options. You created an exit for yourself and Andrew, using the story that I was incompetent. I did love you. I believe you. She looked up, surprised. Love is not the only requirement for safety. 30 years. Real years. Some beautiful. They do not purchase permission for what you did next. Where am I supposed to go? You have family, personal savings, and the income you kept from consulting. You also have access to the condo Evan purchased using company money until ownership is sorted out. I am not throwing you into the street. This is my home. You were already planning to sell it. Because I thought we would decide together. The plan names Andrew as agent and gives Evan authority if I resist. She could not answer. Dylan looked at his envelope. So what happens to us? The question described the entire table. Not, what happens to you? What happens to us? Your company position ends Friday, I told him. The vehicle goes back. The expense card closed yesterday. You have 6 weeks of severance based on the work you actually performed. You are 27. You can build a life that does not wait for mine to end. You're firing your own son after a car accident? I am ending a job you treated like inheritance. And the will? You receive a modest amount and personal items. No company shares, no lake house. Because I said something stupid? Because your first private response to my possible death was liquidity. The inheritance change is not revenge. I finally understand wealth has prevented you from becoming someone who can stand without expecting my death to improve the view. Dylan stared at the table. Do you still love me? Yes. Then why does everyone keep saying love while taking everything? Because access is not love. I looked at Sophie. Your lease guarantee ends at renewal. I will not destroy your studio, contact clients, or demand immediate repayment. You will sign a realistic schedule for the money you accepted or decline and lose any relationship with me for the foreseeable future. Your choice, she whispered. I was angry at you. I know. You missed everything. Not everything. Enough. Yes, good without having to ask. So you accepted stolen money? I didn't think of it that way. You worked hard not to, she cried. I'm sorry. That may become meaningful later. Tonight it does not erase the decision. Evan stood. You're acting like we wanted you dead. The room froze. I looked at him. Laura asked the doctor not to revive me. You supported her. Dylan discussed the trust. Sophie sighed about missing meetings. You discussed taking the company. What phrase would make that kinder? We thought you had no quality of life. You had not waited a week. The doctor said I might wake. We were scared. Fear does not explain the speed of your planning. Expectation does. Laura whispered, I did not want you dead. You wanted the complications of me gone. That's cruel. You called 57 respectable. Her hands covered her face. I was in shock. Shock reveals things too. Aunt Ellen spoke for the first time. Laura, did you really sign a resuscitation limitation after 3 days? Laura said nothing. Evan? Ellen asked. We believed it reflected Tom's wishes. Did anyone call Sophie or Dylan before signing? Dylan looked confused. I thought Mom handled it. Did anyone call his sister? It was a medical decision, Laura said. Ellen stared. You were preparing to let my brother die and called nobody who might disagree. The relatives began asking their own questions. Laura's brother wanted to know why he had heard I was cognitively declining before I left the hospital. My cousin asked who authorized Andrew to photograph the house. A neighbor admitted Laura had told her I might never return to work. The plan depended on everyone receiving one controlled fragment. Once the fragments entered the same room, the story could no longer stand. Evan grabbed his folder. I'm not sitting here for this. Then leave. You'll regret humiliating the only person who kept your business alive. Marion appeared in the doorway from the kitchen. She had arrived quietly at my request and waited with Raymond in the breakfast room. The employees kept it alive, she said. Evan turned. You? Yes. You've wanted my job for years. I wanted invoices that represented real work. Raymond stepped beside her. And I wanted the technicians you blame for your mistakes to receive their jobs back. Evan looked at me. You brought employees into a family dinner? You brought company ownership into it. He walked toward the foyer. Laura called his name. He stopped but did not turn. Where will you go? Home. The condo? Yes. Andrew has a financial interest in it, Marion said. The funds are being reviewed. Evan laughed without humor. Of course. He looked at me one final time. You loved me like a son until blood mattered. Blood did not remove you. Your choices did. Same result. No. One makes you a victim, the other gives you a chance to change. He left. The front door closed. Laura stared after him. Dylan followed 20 minutes later after returning the company card to Marion. Sophie remained. She sat near the window crying silently while guests gathered coats. No one ate the second pie. The sign reading "Grateful for Second Chances" remained above the buffet. Laura's brother asked whether she wanted to stay with him. She nodded. She went upstairs and packed one suitcase. Before leaving, she stopped beside me. Was any part of you happy to do this publicly? Honest question. Yes. Her face twisted. Then it was revenge. Part of me wanted witnesses because you had already spent weeks telling them I was confused. That part was angry. The boundary remains necessary even if anger stood beside it. Could we have repaired this privately? Would you have admitted it privately if I had no records? She looked toward the dining room. I don't know. That is why the room mattered. I loved you. I loved you too. Past tense? Not completely. Tears filled her eyes. That makes it worse. Yes. Will you ever forgive me? Forgiveness is not tonight's assignment. She left with her brother. Sophie remained after everyone else except Ellen, Marion, and Raymond had gone. I need to tell you something, she said. We sat at the table beneath the second chance sign. When I first saw the vendor payments, I was going to tell you. Why didn't you? I called. You were in Chicago for a hospital project. You said you had 5 minutes before a meeting. I remembered the call vaguely. I started explaining that Evan was doing something weird. You told me to speak to him directly because you trusted him. My stomach tightened. Then what? He came to my studio. He said the accounts were temporary, that you had always intended him to have part of the company, and that if I made accusations, I would destroy the family and probably lose your financial support too. So he offered money. He called it event consulting. And you accepted? Yes. Why? Because I hated that Evan and Dylan had positions in your company while I had to call you when rent was short. I wanted something that felt guaranteed. You could have asked for a real investment review. You would have turned it into a lecture. Probably. I wanted the money without feeling like the difficult daughter. Her honesty did not excuse the act. It explained the emotional route. You were allowed to be angry with me. I know. You were allowed to stop speaking to me, confront me, or tell the family I failed you. I know. You were not allowed to fund your life through silence while employees worked for the money being taken. I know. Do you? I'm starting to. She looked toward the empty chairs. Were you really awake? Yes. Did you hear everything? Yes. I said you were never there. I heard. I'm sorry. For saying it or for when you said it, she thought. For saying it while you couldn't answer. The feeling was real. Good. She looked surprised. You don't get to erase your childhood because I was injured. But you also don't get to turn my death into compensation. She nodded. What happens now? We stay apart for 3 months. No money, no lease rescue, no messages through your mother. You repay gradually if the studio survives. If it doesn't, you still tell the truth. After 3 months, we can meet. Do you want me in your life? I don't know what size is safe. She began crying again. Fair. Do not call it fair because agreement feels mature. Live it. Okay. She left. Marion helped me remove the sign. Raymond carried the unused folding chairs to the garage. Ellen stayed in the guest room. At midnight, I sat alone in the dining room where Laura had hosted 26 Thanksgivings. The house felt larger without the performance holding it together. I expected satisfaction. What arrived was grief. I remembered Laura dancing barefoot in that room when we first moved in. Evan completing homework at the table. Dylan building a cardboard fort beneath it. Sophie practicing lines for the play I later missed. None of those memories disappeared because betrayal entered later. That is what makes family boundaries painful. You are not only leaving the people who hurt you, you are surrendering the hope that the best version of the past will return and make the present understandable. The marriage ended quietly over the following year. No dramatic courtroom scenes. Laura kept her personal savings, vehicle, jewelry, and a fair share of what we had built together after the money connected to Evan's scheme was accounted for. I kept the company interest that remained mine, and eventually sold the Webster Groves house because living inside every memory became exhausting. Andrew did not remain with Laura. Once my properties and company were unavailable, his patience shortened. He told her the public exposure had damaged his reputation and that he needed distance. She discovered the man who had promised a future was primarily attracted to a future financed by someone else's past. I felt no triumph. Watching someone face the same conditional love she had offered me did not restore anything. Laura moved into a condominium near her brother. She continued charity work for a while, then withdrew after questions about the company transfers reached people she knew. I never publicly circulated intimate messages. The Thanksgiving witnesses already knew enough. Her reputation changed because the story she had curated no longer controlled every fact. Dylan struggled immediately after losing the company role. The leased SUV returned. The club membership ended. His apartment consumed most of his real salary. He blamed me, then Evan, then the accident, then the economy. 6 months later, he accepted an entry-level sales position with a commercial equipment distributor in Kansas City. The title was smaller, the expectations measurable, and no one cared who his father was. His first meaningful apology arrived after a year. "I spent my whole life thinking the company was the family's reward for putting up with your absence. I believed inheritance was money you owed us for every dinner you missed. When you were in the hospital, I was scared, but the first safe thing my mind found was what I would receive. I hate that about myself." He wrote that he had visited the study because he wanted certainty about adulthood without building it. He did not ask for the lake house or job. I waited 2 months before answering. "Thank you for naming it. We can meet for breakfast." We rebuilt slowly. No employment, no loans, no advance inheritance. When he needed a car repair, he asked whether I knew a trustworthy mechanic rather than asking me to pay. That ordinary change mattered. Sophie's studio almost failed when the monthly transfers stopped. She downsized, released the expensive lease, moved into a shared workspace, and told her 2 employees the truth. She had accepted money not earned, through legitimate work, and could no longer support the old overhead. 1 employee left. The other stayed. Sophie began repaying in small amounts. Some months $200. Some months nothing, communicated in advance. After our 3-month separation, we met with a family therapist. She confronted me about the years I missed. I did not defend every absence with payroll, clients, or security. "I was not there enough," I said. "I thought money would prove the reason." She cried. "I wanted you to choose me over an emergency once." "I should have. Would you now?" "Yes, but saying it after childhood is cheap." "It is." "What would help?" "Stop treating every conversation like a problem to solve." I learned. Our relationship became limited but real. She did not regain financial access or a larger inheritance. She did regain a father who attended her small studio reopening, placed his phone on silent, and stayed through cleanup without offering business advice until asked. Evan was different. Calder Systems insurer and outside accountants handled the missing funds. I gave him an opportunity to enter a structured repayment agreement and avoid forcing the company into a longer public fight. He agreed after several weeks. He sold the condo, withdrew from the failed investment with Andrew, and transferred what remained. Much of the money was gone. Employees learned enough to understand why he had disappeared, though I did not provide personal details. Marion held a meeting and told them the company had discovered serious unauthorized payments. Family leadership had ended, and future oversight would be independent. Several former employees contacted me. One said Evan had fired him after he questioned a duplicate vendor. I offered positions back where possible and apologized directly. Being betrayed did not excuse the people I had failed while trusting the betrayer. Evan wrote no apology during the first year. He sent explanations. "I always knew I was temporary. You gave Dylan your name. Laura said the will could change. I protected the company when you were distracted." Every letter treated fear as authorization. I stopped reading after the opening paragraph and returned them. 18 months after Thanksgiving, a shorter letter arrived. "I stole because I believed love without legal ownership was temporary. That belief explains why the opportunity tempted me. It does not explain why I said yes 43 times. You gave me more than my biological father ever did, and I punished you for the one thing you could not force him to surrender. I told myself I was collecting what a son deserved. In truth, I was making sure I never had to risk hearing no." I read the letter twice. When you were unconscious, I was frightened you would die. I was also relieved that uncertainty might end. I hate that both things were true. I did not want your suffering. I wanted your authority gone. That is close enough to wanting you gone that I will not ask you to soften it. "No request," I replied. "Thank you for finally writing about what you chose rather than what you feared." "I am not ready for contact," he answered. "Understood." 3 years passed before we met. A public cafe, daylight, no company discussion. Evan had taken an operations job for a regional maintenance contractor under managers who knew part of his history. He lived in a modest apartment. "Do you still call me your son?" he asked. Not when speaking casually. His face tightened. "Why?" "Because the word still makes me remember how confidently I believed it protected us." "Am I not your son?" Biology did not decide it then. It does not decide it now. Relationship does. And ours? Damaged. Dead? No. What would repair look like? Not returning to Calder Systems, not restoring inheritance, not handling money, maybe occasional meals. Honesty when you feel resentment, accepting that I may never use the word the same way. He looked down. Do you love me? Yes. That feels impossible. Love is not trust. I used to think that was something people said when they wanted control without responsibility. Now? Now I think I used access as proof of love because access was easier to measure. We began meeting twice a year. No photographs, no birthday checks, no holiday assumptions. When he married a woman named Rebecca several years later, he invited me but did not ask me to walk beside him, give a speech, pay, or restore any family title. I attended as Tom. During the reception, he introduced me to one friend by saying, "This is the man who raised me. Not father, not stepfather. Accurate." I accepted the sentence. Laura's apology came later than the children's and carried less possibility. 2 years after the marriage ended, she asked to meet. We chose a quiet restaurant in Clayton. She looked older, not ruined. Consequences had not turned her into a different social class or destroyed her life. She remained comfortable, simply without the structure she had expected to inherit intact. I told myself you had already left the marriage through work, she said. Maybe part of me had. That doesn't excuse me. No. I loved Andrew because he listened. Did he? He listened to what I wanted and reflected it back. That isn't always the same. I know now. She stared at her water. When you were in the hospital, I panicked. You signed quickly because I was afraid you would wake severely disabled and I would become your caregiver after spending years feeling alone. The honesty hurt. You thought my survival might become punishment. Yes. Why didn't you say you could not care for me? Because everyone believed I was the devoted wife. You protected the image by trying to remove the situation that contradicted it. Tears filled her eyes. Yes. And the transfers? Evan told me you would never give him equal ownership. I believed helping him created fairness. With money belonging to employees and the company. I did not let myself think about that. And Andrew? I wanted one life that felt chosen for me. You could have left. I wanted the house. There it was, spoken without decoration. I wanted the house, security, and a clean story. I wanted you to become the man who had worked too much and generously let me go. The accident made me believe the story might happen without confrontation. Do you wish I had died? She covered her mouth. For several minutes in that hospital, I wished the decision would be made for me. I looked at her. 30 years sat between us. Thank you for telling the truth. Do you hate me? No. Do you forgive me? I no longer need you to become the wife I believed you were in order to trust my own memory of the marriage. That is as close as I am today. Can we be friends? No. She nodded, crying. I expected that. Then why ask? Because part of me still believes enough remorse should restore something. Remorse can change you without returning you to the place you damaged. We finished dinner. I never met with her privately again. We exchanged messages about major family events. She attended Sophie's wedding several years later. We sat on opposite sides of the room and behaved kindly. No reunion. No final kiss. Some relationships become healthier only after access ends permanently. Calder Systems changed too. Marion became president 3 years after the accident. Raymond returned to retirement after training a new operations director who had started as a field technician. I remained chairman for a while, then sold a majority interest into an employee ownership structure. I retained enough for retirement and advisory involvement, but stopped making the company the center of my identity. Profit sharing reached dispatchers, warehouse staff, installers, technicians, and managers. The first annual meeting after the change, a refrigeration technician named Carlos stood and said, I worked here 17 years, and this is the first time family business includes my family. That sentence embarrassed me more than any accusation. I had called the company something built for my children, while other people sacrificed evenings, backs, marriages, and weekends to create it. Losing control to betrayal taught me that control had never been the same as stewardship. I sold the Innsbruck Lake House rather than letting it remain an inheritance battleground. Part of the proceeds funded employee emergency grants. Part supported my retirement. Part created scholarships for skilled trade students. Dylan initially viewed the sale as another punishment. Years later, he said, "I miss the dock, but I understand why you didn't leave us a monument to fighting." I purchased a smaller cabin near the current river, simple enough that nobody could mistake it for a future financial plan. I invited people individually. No one had permanent access. Sophie visited first. She brought groceries and asked before posting a photograph. Dylan came later and paid for fuel. Evan did not visit for 5 years. When I finally invited him for one afternoon, he stood on the porch and said, "I won't ask whether this becomes mine." Good. I thought saying it might help. It did. We fished badly and spoke carefully. He left before dinner because closeness remained tiring. That was okay. I am 63 now. The accident left some weakness in my left hand and occasional headaches, but I returned to a full life that nobody at the hospital table had budgeted for. I live in a 2-bedroom house near Forest Park, close enough to walk among trees and far enough from Webster Groves that I do not pass the old Tudor accidentally. A young family purchased it. They removed Laura's formal dining wallpaper and kept the leaded glass windows. I drove by once, then decided memories did not require surveillance. Sophie is married to a documentary editor named Marcus. She runs a smaller, profitable version of Finch and Bloom and pays every worker before herself. Dylan works in commercial sales, owns a modest condominium, and no longer introduces himself through Calder Systems. Evan remains in operations and sends a short message on Father's Day. Some years I reply, "Thank you." Some years, "I'm glad you're doing well." Laura lives near Kansas City after moving closer to her brother. She never married Andrew. I hear she volunteers with a caregiver support organization, which may be sincere and may contain irony. I do not investigate. Forgiveness sometimes means declining to make another person's development your responsibility. The most meaningful relationship I rebuilt was with Sophie, because we confronted both sides. She betrayed me, I neglected her. Those truths were not equal in kind, but neither needed erasure. During therapy, she once said, "I used your worst failure as permission for mine." I answered, "And I used providing money as permission not to see your pain." We did not call that balance. We called it accuracy. Dylan learned something similar. Evan's wounds were real, but real wounds do not create ownership over the person who caused or failed to heal them. Laura's loneliness was real. It did not authorize an affair, hidden transfers, or the hope that my accident would simplify her exit. My work mattered. It did not excuse every absence. Mature self-worth required me to face what I had done without accepting responsibility for what they chose afterward. Families often demand one extreme. Either the betrayed person must be flawless to justify boundaries, or any flaw becomes evidence everyone's behavior was equally complicated. That is how accountability disappears. I was not a perfect husband or father. They still did not have the right to wish my voice away, take money, and plan my future while I could hear them. Last Thanksgiving, I hosted 11 people at my house: Marion and her husband, Raymond, Sophie and Marcus, Dylan and his girlfriend, my sister Ellen, 2 former Calder employees whose families were traveling. Evan was not invited that year. Neither was Laura. Invitations were not moral rankings. They reflected the relationships I had energy and trust to hold. Before dinner, Sophie asked whether we could take a photograph. "Private?" I asked. "Private, unless everyone agrees afterward." Everyone agreed. Marion set a timer and hurried into the frame. Raymond blinked. Dylan laughed halfway through. I stood in the center because it was my home, not because I had paid for the meal. We kept the imperfect picture, no caption about second chances, no claim that everyone important had returned. The people absent were absent for reasons, not erased from history. After dessert, Dylan helped wash dishes. "Do you still hear us?" he asked. I knew what he meant. "Sometimes." "What part?" "Liquidity." He closed his eyes. "I'm sorry. I know. Does it hurt less?" "Yes. Because Partly. Mostly because I no longer... "It should be." He laughed sadly. "Fair." I looked at him. "You can say fair now." He smiled. "Progress." Sophie joined us with towels. "What about what I said?" she asked. "That I missed your life?" "Yes. I hear that too." "Does it hurt?" "Yes." "Because it's true?" "Because it became the last thing you wanted me to hear before believing I might die." Tears entered her eyes. I wish I could take it back. You can't. I know. But you have given it a different ending. She nodded. We finished the dishes. The conversation did not destroy dinner. Accountability had become ordinary enough to survive a kitchen. That is what healing looked like for the relationships that remained. Not forgetting, not pretending the original family had returned. Truth no longer requiring a formal reveal every time it entered the room. People hear my story and focus on the Thanksgiving confrontation. They like the envelopes, the records, the public silence. Those details are satisfying because betrayal creates a hunger for visible consequences. But the strongest moment was not when I exposed them. It happened in the hospital when I chose not to move. The machine said I was unconscious. My family's honesty believed the machines. Listening saved me from returning to the same life without understanding its price. Later, boundaries saved me from turning that knowledge into rage that destroyed employees, innocent partners, and myself. I did not want them homeless. I wanted them unable to use my life as infrastructure. I did not want the company burned. I wanted the people who built it protected. I did not need Laura publicly ruined. I needed the marriage ended. I did not need my children to suffer forever. I needed them to become adults without treating my death as a financial event. Some did more work than others. Some relationships returned in smaller forms. One ended permanently. The differences were not inconsistency. They were responses to behavior. Forgiveness is not a package containing equal access for everyone who says sorry. It is freedom from organizing your life around the injury. Trust is separate. Inheritance is separate. Employment is separate. A place at Thanksgiving is separate. Healthy people stop demanding those things arrive together. I spent decades believing my value came from keeping the company stable, financing the family, solving emergencies, and absorbing resentment. The accident stripped away my ability to perform those functions for 6 days, and my family's first private conversation revealed how much of their love had become attached to what my absence would release. That discovery almost destroyed me. It also gave me the chance to build a life where being alive was not merely a delay in someone else's plan. So here is the question I would ask anyone listening, because people remain divided when they learn I rebuilt limited relationships with Dylan, Sophie, and eventually Evan, but permanently ended my marriage and removed every family member from financial control. If you woke from a coma knowing your wife had tried to limit resuscitation, your children had discussed inheritance beside your bed, your stepson had stolen from your company because he feared never being a real son, and your daughter had accepted money to stay silent, but some of them later confessed fully, repaid what they could, respected permanent boundaries, and changed for years, would you allow a smaller relationship to grow? Or would hearing them plan their future while you lay trapped inside your body close the door forever?